Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The House has moved its defense policy bill out of committee, mixing acquisition changes with broader policy fights. But with the Senate still to act and negotiations ahead, this version is far from final. And what shows up in this bill will shape how agencies buy, manage, and oversee work across the government. We have the president of the Professional Services Council, Stephaie Kostro, here to walk us through the headlines. Stephaie, thanks so much for joining me.
As always, Terry, thanks for having me.
We don't have anything to talk about, right?
If only.
Let's talk about the NDAA markup by the House Armed Services Committee. Last Thursday, it ended up being pretty long and contentious. 14 hours, 900 amendments. When you look at that and you also think about the vote count, 44-12 on what is normally a very bipartisan bill, what are the big headlines you take away?
So, Terry, I just want to put into context for your listeners a little bit about what the House Armed Services Committee just did, this Herculean task that they undertook last week, right? As a HASC staff alumna myself, I look back with fondness, because it's in the rearview mirror, on these markups, right? I worked on full committee issues, which meant the policy issues that came up usually in the late afternoon to early evening and could extend all the way past midnight into 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's not a surprise that it took more than 14 hours for them to go through this giant of a bill. What it does, headline-wise, is it does authorize more than $1 trillion for fiscal year 27 for the Department of Defense/War and the national security programs of the Department of Energy, basically the National Nuclear Security Administration. And it really hews closely to what the president asked for FY27. That was the amount, 1.15 trillion, that the president asked for in his budget request. That's discretionary spending. The president also asked for 350 billion in mandatory spending, which is going to be carried in a separate bill, not this authorization bill. But the big headlines for me is the fact that, one, there were 2 titles within the bill dedicated to acquisition issues and acquisition reforms. Those are Titles 8 and 18. And then there was a smattering of other sections that talked about contracting, et cetera. So we can talk about those. Second is there was a real focus on developing the contracting and acquisition workforce. This is an issue that we've seen ebb and flow in terms of popularity. And I think there is general agreement, you mentioned contentious issues, this is not one of them, that the workforce within the government needs to function differently when it comes to contracting. And so those are the big takeaways for me.
The bill, as it went into markup, had a number of acquisition provisions, a lot of them pushing speed, judgment over, those kinds of things, trying to move things along more quickly. Where do you see that coming out in actual practice?
So if the coin of the realm in calendar 2025 was efficiency, as we saw through the Department of Government Efficiency and other contract review mechanisms, I think here in 2026, we're really seeing emphases on innovation and speed. Together, I call them agility, but I think that is really the focus area, and that was reflected in the markup last week. And I expect it'll be reflected in the Senate Armed Services Committee markup this coming week. And so, that is what my takeaway is for that, is that it is about delivery of capability, in this case to the warfighter, quickly, efficiently, and cost effectively.
Stephaie Kostro is president of the Professional Services Council. Stephaie, an acquisition adjacent issue in my mind is right to repair. It's been in, it's been out, it's been supported, it's been opposed. That seemed to move a little closer to actual reality in this version of the bill.
I do know, Terry, and thanks for raising this issue, that the right to repair issue set has been very prevalent in the last few years in the National Defense Authorization Act and in the Appropriations Act, too, as we move forward. And what we really look at it as is an emphasis on intellectual property and technical data rights. Can the warfighters who are deployed overseas repair their equipment quickly? There are longstanding arrangements through licensing agreements where service members can get access to technical data. And many times when the government, actually in all times when the government provides funding for research and development, they have access, as they should, to the intellectual property that results from that. The question that I have, Terry, is that when we talk about right to repair and we're talking about commercial solutions, so things that you can buy in the marketplace as a service or as a product, oftentimes those things are developed with industry R&D funding, and therefore it is industry who owns the intellectual property. It becomes a question of what right does the government have to that IP, to that technical data? And those are conversations that we need to have, not just when we have markups for the National Defense Authorization Act, but throughout the year. And so for us, it is really looking through the lens of investments, intellectual property, and technical data rights.
Do you see the creation of the product support manager position as a way to mediate those kinds of conversations?
So there is a provision in the HASC-passed bill that talks about an ombudsman and about mediation and about how the government can access the information and the technical data that they need at the speed of relevance when they need it. And I think there is a real case to be made that an ombudsperson can help mediate that very sticky area. It really remains to be seen how the language emerges on the Senate side as well, because this is an issue that the Senate has been pushing over the last few years, and what the members of Congress think is appropriate going forward. This gets us to the oversight question of what is the proper role for Congress in overseeing all of this back and forth. And I think there is a really strong case, again, to be made that Congress can move forward in this area with industry interests in mind. So making sure that we are protecting private sector investments and making it an attractive value proposition to work with the government and not allow the government to take over intellectual property and technical data rights. And on the other hand, 100% make sure that the warfighters have the information and the specifications and that they need to be able to do what we're asking them to do, and that is be in harm's way and defend American interests abroad.
Let's follow the oversight thread for a minute, because there are a number of amendments that were adjudicated that were really aimed at increasing oversight. Things like reporting requirements, faster explanations for key decisions. What do you infer there about what Congress's concerns are right now and where they want to be with respect to oversight of key defense programs?
There are a lot of reporting requirements that were in the HASC-passed bill, not only in the bill itself, but in the committee report that accompanies the bill. It's what we like to call directive report language. So if you open up the committee print of the bill itself, you'll find all of the bill language, which is subject to conference and further amendment on the floor of the House, but you also get the committee report. And there are a lot of reports directed to the Pentagon and others to make sure, whether it's the Comptroller General over at GAO or others, that they would actually do analysis and report back to Congress on some key issues. One of those issues, and I'll give you this example, is artificial intelligence. And so we have a lot of reports required both in certain sections of the bill language. Section 1501 jumped out to me, but elsewhere where the department does have to report back to Congress. And I think this highlights an area where, Congress is not entirely sure what they want to do with artificial intelligence, what guardrails they want to put in place. And so getting information about how AI is being used will help inform that oversight function as they go forward.
Any other AI headlines that caught your eye?
Oh, AI is, again, one of those areas where there is so much potential to replace functions currently performed by humans, but we need the human in the loop. And so I think you saw a lot of that within the HASC-passed bill, things about talking about incident reporting, talking about life cycle of AI systems. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. And as we move forward with the Senate version of the bill as well, we'll have to see how much overlap there is.
These are important tea leaves for us to read, but you've been pretty clear in your conversation here about the importance of conference, that the Senate still needs to weigh in. We are sitting here at the beginning of June with this committee markup. What is the schedule as you see it moving forward?
So it's not unusual for the House Armed Services Committee to be the first one out of the gate between the two chambers. And so the House-passed bill is now going to go forward on the House floor. I don't think we have a floor schedule, but my understanding is that they want to get it done sometime in July, which would be great, but that is always aspirational. The Senate Armed Services Committee has their markup coming up this week. And so the subcommittees and the full committee will have closed conversations, so closed to the public, this week, and hopefully we'll get a Senate Armed Services Committee passed bill at the end of this week. Then moving forward, both floors will have to consider the final bills, at least out of their chambers, and then conference will happen. In election years, like the one we're in right now, it is not unreasonable to expect them to get across the finish line before the end of this fiscal year, but that hasn't happened in recent memory. And so I think as we move forward, we'll have to watch very carefully what that calendar looks like.
Stephaie Kostro is president of the Professional Services Council. Stephaie, great to catch up with you and have you catch us up on all of the NDAA discussion.
Busy weeks ahead, Terry. Thanks for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.